glad that you've decided to join us for this year's An Evening with the Junior League. Now, traditionally, this event has been set aside to recognize and celebrate our partners and our sponsors, our members, and anyone who supported the Junior League over the course of the last year. So we want to say thank you. Even in the midst of the coronavirus and the pandemic, we felt that it was important for us still to gather, even online, to be able to recognize those who help move the mission of the Junior League forward, which is to develop the potential of women and impact the community through strategic projects. So we're so glad that you've decided to join us. This evening, we're going to hear from our keynote, Angela Chaburka, who we'll introduce in a minute. We're going to hear from our incoming president, Andrea Bohr. We're going to talk a little bit about what the league has been doing this year and where we're headed. And then we're actually going to recognize all of our partners and sponsors who've been with us for the past year. Now, coming up next actually is Angela Chaburka. Angela used to be a Junior League member. She's now a sustaining member, but she's been very involved in the community and is currently the Ogden City Council chairwoman. We're so excited to have her here tonight. She knows what it's like to be on the front lines. She knows what it's like to try and move a community to a better place. And she knows what it's like to do that as a woman, as a mom, in a position of leadership and influence. And we're so excited that she's going to share with us tonight about the impact of the women in Ogden on the landscape of Ogden. And so please let me introduce to you Angela Chaburka.
Hi everybody, this is Angela Chaburka, and I'm so happy to be able to join you in this electronic means, even though we can't be together in person. I so appreciate the invitation to present for the evening with the Junior League of Ogden. This organization has certainly been a big part of my life, and appreciate so much the mission of the organization and all the work that all of you are involved in the community. I'm going to do a little slide presentation for you and probably turn off my camera here so I'm not distracted by myself while I'm recording. But just so you know, I am here behind the screen and want to tell you a little bit about the work I'm currently involved with. I'm working for Intermountain Healthcare. And then also just tell you a little bit about why or how I got in this position and what I'm working on and how that might relate a little bit to your work with the Junior League. At first, I just really do want to admit that, you know, I'm very privileged to be able to choose this type of work. I mean, obviously, I've worked really hard to get education experience to be able to do it as well. But really, really lucky that I've been able to pursue a career that really is meaningful to me and take on this kind of work that I hope really does make an impact in communities even when I'm gone. So I'll just go ahead and start here. Like I said, I'm going to shut off my camera so I'm not distracted. Or maybe so you can see me, but I can't see myself. So the project I'm working on currently is called the Alliance for the Determinants of Health. And that project really looking at some research that's come out that a lot of people probably already knew, and lots of folks working in this organization, the Junior League, have thought of before. But basically, research that shows the zip code where you live actually really determines more about what your health outcomes are overall in your life than your genetic code. And so this data right here was actually collected from Utah. These are not real zip codes, but these are real neighborhoods in Utah. Where on the west side, you can see that life expectancy overall is about 75.8 years, which is pretty close to the national average. Whereas on the East Town Heights, you have a life expectancy around 85 years. So many people might say, wow, you know, that's really big. That's almost 10-year difference in life expectancy. And so we really want to explore at Intermountain Healthcare why that might be and how we might be able to help support people so that everybody lives the same amount of years in their life if they can. You can see too that education and household income actually aligns kind of closely with some of these disparities we see, right? That maybe household income on one side of town is about $40,000 per year, whereas on the other side it's about $77,000. There's lots of factors, you know, that of course impact that, your education level and things like that, but it also has to do with the opportunities that are available in your community. And This is not unusual across the entire nation, actually. Sometimes people get pretty surprised that this is a fact in Utah because we maybe don't see those things quite as often here. But it definitely is. You can see we have same kinds of color differences here where the red is the highest distress score and the blue is the lowest. So there's definitely some differences and some disparities in some of those communities, and sometimes that's as much as just even right across the street from one another. So this project is really in alignment with the mission of Intermountain Healthcare. We are a not-for-profit health system, and we also have an integrated health insurance plan called Select Health. And we really do, as a not-for-profit health system, intend that we want to help all people in the community live the healthiest lives possible. It certainly isn't only the people that are covered under our insurance. But we really are a health system that's looking at how can we support communities overall. And the project I'm working on, as I mentioned, is focused on Select Health Medicaid members in 2 geographies in Utah, Weber, and Washington counties, looking at how those disparities I mentioned might impact people, and then how we might address some of those factors outside of the healthcare system to help support people to be healthier. And you can see on the chart on the right that really only about 10% of access to health care really indicates your overall health in the end. We might be a little surprised by that number because lots of times we just think, oh, if we just have access to really good health care, then we're really going to be a lot healthier. But genetics plays a part in that, and then also your social environmental factors as well as individual behaviors are about 60% of what makes your overall health outcomes. So that might make up that difference in the 10 years. Here we go, looking at how we actually spend our money in the United States. So some of you might know this better than others, but in the US, we actually spend about $2.6 trillion on medical services or medical care. And when you look on the left-hand side, you can see those numbers, those percentages that I mentioned in the prior slide kind of actually give the overall 100%. So healthcare is just the 10%, genetics, etc., and individual behaviors. But we're spending the money that we provide for healthcare really on the outcomes of medical issues. So 90% is actually on medical services, whereas we spend about 10% overall in the United States on helping to support healthier behaviors. So that's something we're really thinking about in the Alliance work and as a system overall, is how can we kind of shift some of that spending a little bit, and I'll show you a little bit more about that on the slides here. So you can see, as compared to other countries, we're spending quite a large amount or percentage of our GDP across the board on health care. And the problem is that we're getting a lot less bang for our buck, right? So our poor return on investment is that we might have an outcome of about 75, 78 years overall for life expectancy, whereas in other countries, they might be spending relatively the same and sometimes a little bit more or less, but they're getting a lot better health outcomes. So what we really want to do is look at where are we spending those dollars and maybe how can we support folks a little bit more so they have better outcomes, and that's for everybody across the board. And then maybe spend some money more on social care instead of just on the healthcare side. So the way that we're looking at this is we're following a model that's out of the CMS, and there's lots of different ways to define these social determinants of health, they're called, but this is the model that we're using. So we have primary and secondary social determinants of health, and this is really thinking about the place that a person, works, lives, plays, is born, is raised, and thinking about how that community is established and set up to help support them. So the primary needs a person has are really thinking about food security, their utilities and housing and transportation needs, and then interpersonal violence, which might include, both physical and mental health kinds of traumas that people might face in their community. And then once you have those basic needs fixed, right, or those physiological needs, then you can kind of move up that hierarchy. You might recognize the Maslow's hierarchy there to the right, that then you might be able to think like, hey, I can further my education, or maybe I can think about going for that jog I'm supposed to be taking, or getting that extra exercise. It's very hard to focus on some of those secondary determinants when you're thinking about living in the moment and taking care of your basic needs. So one way that is we really are thinking about how to address the individual needs that people have. Right now, obviously, if someone's hungry, we want to make sure that they have food, have shelter, have clothing. But as a system, we really want to get farther upstream. We want to think about the community impact that we can have and improve the community conditions so a person is never experiencing maybe that housing insecurity or that food issue. So we're really working on getting farther upstream as much as we can, but it's very difficult because first we need to understand what those individual social needs are and then be able to address them, figure out what resources are available in the community, and then how we can build upon that to really flip the system a little bit. So this is the model we're using, and I just wanted to kind of show you how we're working so closely with local organizations like the local mental health authorities and the federally qualified health center. So locally that would be Midtown Community Health Center and Weber Human Services, for example, and then community-based organizations and also our own plan. And we're actually trying to change the culture of healthcare so that we start to ask these questions and screen and assess people when they come into the office. Hey, is there anything beyond your health need that you have? How are things going on at home? Are you feeling secure with how much food that you have in the house? Are you feeling secure in your housing? And how might we connect you with services that might support you so that could help you with your overall health? And people that are at very high risk, then we are connecting them with a community health worker, which is a person that might help people navigate some of those systems and make sure they're connected to those resources and use some technology to help make sure all those things are aligned and connected. So that's how the work is happening on the ground with the Alliance project. And this project, like I mentioned before, is a 3-year demonstration project. And then we hope to scale anything that we find that seems to be successful across our entire system, which Intermountain Health System is across all of Utah, into Las Vegas, and also into southern Idaho as well. So it's an exciting project to be a part of, and we hope to really adjust things in the community too. This slide indicates that we obviously are addressing the needs of the Select Health Medicaid members, but we really want to think about the community overall, how we can help build up that infrastructure for people. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that project in the context of why would I be involved in this work. It's kind of funny because I actually have worked at Intermountain Healthcare for 2 years now, and I was not in the healthcare world before. I was actually an English teacher at Weber State. I was also an elementary school teacher in many different settings. And so that's kind of funny that now I find myself here. And I think some are that when I was a teacher, I really did find that I was frustrated. I loved working with the students and helping them support them academically, but I did also find that it was frustrating sometimes that you could see that some of these challenges that students themselves had no control over, kind of as I mentioned before, those community needs or systematic kind of things that they weren't getting the services that they needed, really to support them to have the best outcomes. Education for me was certainly a pathway to help me find myself and figure out who I was in the world and understand things that maybe I wanted to help work on in the world too. Some of you might know I'm in a doctoral program at the University of Utah, which I started toward the end of my time being an active member in the Junior League of Ogden, and attending the ODI convention with some friends with the Junior League actually was a huge impetus for me actually to go ahead and apply for that doctoral program. You know how sometimes we all have a little bit of that imposter syndrome situation where you're like, oh, I don't know if I'll even get in, or why would I even bother trying to do that? What am I trying to do? And I went to that training and just was so inspired by lots of the work was happening at the national level with the Junior League that actually inspired me to go back to school again. So I'm still in school, will be for a very long time, long story short, basically, that led me to really think about these issues that people are facing that are really beyond their control, that have to do with this idea that we have around equality and equity in the world, right? So I love this drawing, and I will have to put a credit in the slides. But you can see on the left-hand side that sometimes people want to deal with situations and kind of infrastructure and say, oh, we just want to give everybody equal treatment across the board, because that's what's really fair, right? But then if you think about equity, right, you think, okay, well, there's certain folks that are just a little shorter than other folks, and that's just the situation they're in. And so we might want to help to boost some people a little bit more because of those situations that they're kind of born into, or the situation they're facing right now, right? So that's equity. And so then you move on to the next little level and you see reality. If we look at research and data, we can see that there's many folks, as I was mentioning before, on these disparities across the nation, across the world, of course, but especially when we're thinking about what we can do in our small little piece of the pie, there's actually, the reality is that there's certain folks that just have a lot more of advantage just based on where they live, where they were born, and then other folks that have a lot less opportunity based on some of those things too, and they're way beyond their control, things that we think about. So my goal overall, and I love the last part of this image, is I know it's kind of a big, ambitious goal, but I'd like to just get rid of the fence. You know, like, let's just get rid of whatever those systemic barriers are so that everybody has the same opportunity regardless of the situation. And so that's what they call as liberation, right? Is really working toward these things. And I think, you know, some of the challenges we face when we think about that is that sometimes it's easier to work a little farther to the left on this picture, but that's something that really has inspired me about the Junior League, other great advocates in our community here in Ogden, that they are really willing to take on these complex issues that don't have easy answers, that might take years and years and years to try to figure out how to solve, and we might not be around to see the end results of how our work actually has impacted the community, but we know that we're planting the seeds to really make change across the board. So that's one reason I wanted to show you this slide. And I have kind of a longer video to show you in the next slide, so I hope that you'll bear with me. It's about 10 minutes long, but I really think it's important because I want to really talk to people and have them think a little bit about the different roles that we can play in this work in the community. Everybody has a part to play. Everybody can lead at any time. And I feel like I've definitely done that in my career, is thinking about how I might be maybe a leader at sometimes, maybe be working behind the scenes sometimes, and maybe sometimes just leaving space for other people to take over that work as well. So if you don't want to watch the whole video, you don't have to. It's about 10 minutes long, and I'll start it now.
We all know the story of Mrs. Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. We learned it in school as a neat, tidy story of individual heroism. Mrs. Parks, a seamstress tired after a hard day at work, courageously sat down. A young preacher, Dr. Martin Luther King, charismatically stood up. They inspired people to march, and change happened. Well, let me tell you the story in a way you might not have heard it before. Let's begin with Rosa Parks. Born in 1913, she was the granddaughter of slaves. She was a good student, soft-spoken, but strong-willed. Her family believed in standing up against mistreatment. One time when a white boy on roller skates tried to push her off the sidewalk, she pushed back. Mrs. Parks reflected later, "I'd rather be lynched than run over by them." In 1931, she met Raymond Parks, a self-taught, politically active barber. He was the first man she deemed radical enough to marry. He was active in the Scottsboro 9 case, in which 9 young men had been falsely accused of rape. The Communist Party of America financed their defense, and Mr. Parks became an activist in the effort. In December 1943, Mrs. Parks attended her first NAACP meeting. She was the only woman there and was elected group secretary that day, a position she'd hold for the next 12 years. As secretary, she recorded countless cases of unfair treatment, brutality, sexual violence, and lynchings. The local president of the NAACP and her partner for over a decade was Edie Nixon, a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union, who had also been active in registering voters, including Mrs. Parks. He and Parks were the first working-class people to lead a local NAACP. They were eventually elected as state president and secretary as well. Through the NAACP, Miss Parks attended meetings in Jacksonville, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C., where she received leadership training from the legendary NAACP organizer Ella Baker, who became a role model and mentor to her. Miss Baker also inspired Parks to create a youth council in Montgomery. Fred Gray was a 24-year-old attorney who had recently moved to town, only the second African-American lawyer in Montgomery and the 12th in the state. Rosa Parks took him under her wing, regularly meeting him for lunch and encouraging him to take on civil rights work. Clifford and Virginia Dewar were the town's leading white liberals. One day, Mrs. Parks was working for Virginia Dore when they discussed her NAACP work. Mrs. Dore suggested she attend the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, where integrated groups of activists developed their leadership in civil disobedience. Clifford Dore was a board member, and the Dores raised money to send Miss Parks to a 2-week-long workshop on civil rights. At Highlander, she and 47 other diverse activists lived in an integrated community and developed their strategies and tactics as leaders. She came to admire Highlander director Miles Horton's spirit and sense of humor. She was in awe of Septima Clark, the lead instructor who, like Miss Baker, became a role model and mentor for her as women activists. The workshop rejuvenated her, but she was pessimistic about the prospects of a mass movement in Montgomery. While at Highlander, Claudette Colvin, the 15-year-old secretary of the Youth Council, was on her mind. On March 2, 1955, Miss Colvin refused to move to the back of the bus and was arrested. Her arrest outraged the community. While Mrs. Parks and Mrs. Dore raised money for her case, the male leaders in town were concerned that she was too dark-skinned, poor, and young to be sympathetic plaintiff to challenge segregation. On October 21, 1955, 18-year-old Mary Louise Smith, another Youth Council member, refused to move to the back of the bus and was arrested. She was also considered too poor and young to be sympathetic. On Thursday afternoon, December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus and was arrested. The same bus driver, James Blake, had thrown Mrs. Parks off his bus in 1943 for refusing to move. She said, "I felt for a long time that if I was ever told to get up so a white person could sit, that I would refuse to do so." Now, does she sound like the accidental activist we've learned about in school and popular culture, the tired seamstress who just wanted to rest her feet after a hard day at work? She often said that the only thing she was tired of was being segregated and mistreated. Edie Nixon and the Dores went to get her out of jail. Nixon saw opportunity to use Mrs. Parks' case as an ideal plaintiff to challenge segregation. Raymond Parks didn't agree. After much debate, she and Raymond made the difficult, courageous choice, knowing they'd probably lose everything as a result, and they lost a lot, including their jobs in the process. Mrs. Parks called Fred Gray and asked him to represent her. He called Joanne Robinson, a leader of the Women's Political Council, a group of African-American women who had been calling for a bus boycott. She called Edie Nixon, and they agreed to call for a bus boycott Monday, the day of Mrs. Parks' arraignment. Overnight, Miss Robinson printed more than 15,000 flyers at Alabama State College calling for the boycott. Can you imagine making 15,000 flyers on 2014 technology, let alone 1955 technology? And this was especially risky since the university was funded by the segregationist state legislature. The Women's Political Council members met her at dawn and fanned the community with flyers. At 6 a.m., Edie Nixon phoned Reverend Ralph Abernathy of First Baptist Church and suggested a meeting of pastors that afternoon. Reverend Abernathy suggested that the newest pastor in town, Martin Luther King, at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, would be a good host because he had no set alliances, enemies, and had less to lose if it didn't work out. Dr. King was reluctant at first, but eventually agreed. About 50 pastors met that night with Rosa Parks and Joanne Robinson and agreed to support the boycott from the pulpits on Sunday and announce a mass meeting for Monday night. One white pastor, Robert Graves, attended the meeting. He led Trinity Lutheran Church, an African-American congregation, and was an outcast among whites in Montgomery. He hosted Mrs. Parks' NAACP Youth Council meetings at his church and was a friend of hers. He remained an important ally throughout the boycott. His home was eventually bombed. On Saturday, Miss Parks went to Alabama State College, where she was conducting a leadership training for the NAACP. She was discouraged when only 5 students attended. She was no longer discouraged on Monday, however, when she and other leaders marveled at the empty buses and streets filled with African-American citizens walking to school and work. The boycott was on. Rufus Lewis was a businessman and rival of Edie Nixon's. He did not want Nixon to lead the new Montgomery Improvement Association that was created to sustain the boycott. So he nominated his pastor, Dr. King, to lead it, arguing that he was a neutral choice and hoping he could pull strings from behind. That is how Dr. King was drafted into movement leadership. That night, 15,000 people attended a mass meeting, and the new 26-year-old MIA president, Dr. King, gave a prophetic speech that inspired them to commit to the boycott. Mrs. Parks never spoke or was consulted on strategy. Sexism and the desire to make her into a more sympathetic plaintiff converted the experienced leader into the tired seamstress of civil rights myth. Dr. King had spoken with a pastor in Baton Rouge, where they had had a 2-week-long bus boycott in 1953. and learned about the carpool system they implemented to get residents to school, work, church, and shopping errands. He assigned Rufus Lewis to put together a transportation plan that involved 350 cars, providing thousands of rides each day for 12 months. Mrs. Parks at times worked as a dispatcher. A. Philip Randolph, leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union and Dean of America's Civil Rights Leadership, sent his best organizer and strategist to Montgomery to help out. Bayard Rustin was a true outsider, a former Communist Party organizer, a pacifist who was jailed for refusing to fight in World War II, and an openly gay black man in 1955. In February, when he arrived, the police had indicted 115 members of the Montgomery Improvement Association. Rustin, a devoted Gandhian who'd spent 6 months in India, recommended to Nixon that they put on their Sunday best, go down to jail, and turn themselves in. They did so, confounding city leaders. Nixon, Robinson, Parks, and King all believed to varying degrees in self-defense. They all owned guns. Nixon and King's homes had been bombed. Protesters had been attacked. King had actually applied to the governor of Alabama for a permit to carry a gun in his car. Bayard Rustin advised them to get rid of the guns, and he mentored them on nonviolent civil disobedience throughout the campaign. Many others stepped up too. Georgia Gilmore created the Club from Nowhere, and Inez Ricks created the Friendly Club to organize women to make and sell sandwiches, dinners, pies, and cakes during the week to raise money for the Montgomery Improvement Association. Every Monday they would compete to see who could bring the most money to the mass meetings. Ella Baker and Bayard Rustin formed an organization, In Friendship, to also raise money for the movement. Miss Baker took Mrs. Parks on fundraising trips up north. In May, they hosted a fundraising event featuring Rosa Parks at Madison Square Garden that attracted 16,000 people. But Rosa Parks had been an NAACP officer and organizer for more than a decade. Her husband had been active in an effort funded by the Communist Party. So it was decided that she too was a controversial plaintiff. So another woman who refused to move to the back of the bus was chosen to be the lead plaintiff, Aurelia Browder. The Supreme Court struck down segregation in the case of Browder versus Gale, and on December 20th, 1956, 382 days after Mrs. Parks' courageous act, the boycott was over and the buses were integrated. So who is the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott? All of them. Social change always comes from the leadership of the many. We need all kinds of people to step up and play different roles to achieve social change. You can take any part of the civil rights movement or any other social movement and tell a similar story, and you could add many more names to this story. It does not diminish the courage of Mrs. Parks or the prophetic vision of Dr. King to acknowledge that their leadership was part of a larger leadership narrative. We need to see leadership as an action many can take, not just a position few can hold. Leadership is a muscle that everyone has, and it only gets stronger with exercise and practice. We need to build the collective leadership muscles of our organizations and communities if we want to create change. We need to support programs like Public Eyes and community organizing efforts that build the leadership of the many. When the police interrogated Claudette Colvin about who was behind the boycott, she responded, "Our leaders is just we ourselves." That should be our call to action. Step up. We all know this.
Thank you for bearing with me for that long video, but this video I've watched it many times and shown it to many students over the years and different folks, and it's just a huge part of my personal belief system around how everybody has a role to play and that anyone can be a leader at any time. So that leads me just to talk very briefly about the wonderful roles of women in Ogden and the Junior League, of course, as well, and all the other groups that are working in alignment to help to address the needs of the community. That's one thing I really appreciate about our community, is that everyone is very passionate and cares deeply about certain elements of the community or different things that are really important to them. So I love the fact that there's so many ways that we can express those desires to make change. We can do that through advocacy, which Junior League of Ogden has done for its entire history, right? Advocating on the part of different people in the community or groups in the community that need additional support. Courageous action, so standing up to maybe political actions or other kinds of things that we don't necessarily agree with and want to at least ask questions about. I think that that's a huge role that anybody has in the community, but especially a group of women that work together that can ask those questions together and feel that you have the backing of others. I definitely felt that when I decided to run for Ogden City Council. I don't know if many of you may not know me very well, but I'm actually not a kind of person that likes to be out in front all the time. I like to be kind of behind the scenes and be part of the action, but not necessarily be the spokesperson for something. And you know, sometimes you just get kind of tapped on the shoulder, or these opportunities come open to you, and you sometimes have to take on roles that are a little bit more uncomfortable and try them out and see how you might be able to help. And so I definitely felt that stepping into the role of city council is not something I had thought about before, but because I had been involved in a couple of real women run activities with going down to their meetings with some folks from the Junior League and inspired by that, and because I like to look at data and kind of figure out if it could work, I decided to try it out, and it worked out, and we'll see how I can do and help to support the community in that way. But I also think that there's lots of really important things that can happen through thought leadership. So the kinds of questions and the issues that you have delved into at the Junior League have really will help lead other organizations in the community, because all of the women that are involved in the work that you're doing, and all their families and all their spouses and children, also are inspired by these ideas and thoughts that you have, whether it's around thinking about how we're inclusive, thinking about how we're helping to address injustices in the community, thinking about how we can get involved and align with other groups to help support them. I think these are things that are really important, that maybe sometimes people feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or maybe I feel bad that I haven't been able to volunteer as much as I did last year, or maybe I can do more next year. I think this is a place where we need to value all kinds of input and all kinds of leadership, and sometimes that means taking time for yourself and your family when you need to as well. And so that's just how I want to kind of close this talk, is to say we all have a role to play. Sometimes we step up, sometimes we help support other people to step up. Sometimes we support by just sending in a donation. Sometimes we support by being right there on the front lines and doing all the work. And we can make huge amounts of difference in the lives of our own families, but also the community, through just thinking about what we would like to do and what we're able to do in those times. So I really thank you again for inviting me to present to you, and I hope that we get to see each other again sometime soon in real life.
Thank you, Angela. It's so great that you chose to be with us this evening, and we so appreciate your insight. Now, we wanted to shift gears a little bit and give you an update on what's been happening within the Junior League of Ogden over the course of the last year. Last summer, our members voted to start a renewal process for the league. It basically gave us the opportunity to evaluate everything that we're doing, where we're putting our time and where we're putting our resources, and figure out what makes the most sense moving forward. We wanted to position the league for longevity and to create a really powerful legacy. Now, the league's been around for a really long time, and that's amazing. But as we've been around, more and more nonprofits have come onto the landscape, and that's made our role a little bit more muddied. And what we want to do is really fine-tune that and focus it in on what it is we do best and what our niche is in the Ogden community. I believe that the Junior League still has a very powerful role to fulfill here within the Ogden community, but we want to make sure that all of our resources, all of our members, all of our time and energy is focused on what that is. And so we've spent the last year going through that whole renewal process, and it has not been easy. Transition never is, evaluation never is, and it's had some growing pains, but the women have done remarkably as we've tried to figure out where we best fit moving forward. Now we are going to carry that into next year. We followed all these steps and we got as far as we could, but we realized that we didn't quite get to where we were wanting. And so we're going to continue to walk through it until it comes to fruition. And so I'm excited for those who've chosen to stick around and to continue to invest and to build on what we've started this year and move it into next year. I'm excited for the ideas that are coming out. I'm excited for the partnerships that are forming. And I'm just excited for the passion of the women. They're so excited about what we're doing and what we could possibly be doing. And we want to make sure that we capitalize on that. So that's part of where we've been. And now what I want to do is I want to introduce to you Andrea Bohr. Andrea is our incoming president. We're very excited to have her. And she's going to share a little bit about what the league looks like in this next season as we transition boards starting June 1.
Thank you, Cindy. While our league has undergone some restructuring with the small league fast track, the pieces are coming back together nicely. We still have a few small things to work out, but overall I'm feeling really excited about the new structure. Now both junior league members and community members have a lot to look forward to as we approach the summer season. The Oasis Community Garden is in full swing, and last I heard all but 3 plots had been assigned. Oasis Summer Nights, a member favorite, is still set to happen late this summer and into the fall. We also have several educational opportunities scheduled throughout the summer and look forward to gathering again when it is safe to do so. Now traditionally we hold annual dinner in May, and if we've learned anything about life during a pandemic, it is that traditions may look a bit different. Annual dinner ceremoniously ends our league year, our board transitions, and we celebrate our members. It's one of my favorite events of the year. The board and the new positions will still transition beginning June 1st, and we will hold our annual dinner later this summer. The details are yet to be determined. Now earlier this month we did have to postpone 2 events, the charitable chair event with Weber State University and also the Putt Putt Pub Crawl. Both of those events will happen later this fall, and we'll let you know the details as we determine those. All in all, it is an exciting time to be a member of the Junior League of Ogden. Over and over, I hear women share what the league has meant to them and what a positive role it has played in their lives. Share that, and share that with your best friends, your family members, your co-workers, and invite them to join us and get them in touch with our membership director, Aloha Reynolds, by emailing membership@juniorleagueogden.org. I just want to take a quick second to say that we see you, and we see what you're doing. We see the time that you put into the connections that you make with the community members and the community businesses that we work with, and also with each other, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I am excited for what your year is going to look like. Now, the last thing we want to do today is we want to spend a little time giving a special shout out to all the corporations and organizations who have supported the league in a variety of ways over the last year. And so tonight we want to thank Tab Bank, Wadman Corporation, Admiral Beverage, the Elements of Real Estate, Integrated Tax, Weber State University, Wasatch Distributing, Zions Bank, Capstone Nutrition, United Way, and Waste Management for their support of the Junior League and helping us impact our community and develop the potential of women. And with that, that wraps up our evening with the Junior League. Again, thank you so much for choosing to be with us online this evening. We're so excited that you spent some time with us, and we want to make sure that you stick around because we're going to have a Zoom happy hour after this, and we'll be sending the Zoom link out shortly. So be sure to join us. We'll get to say hi to everyone, chat for a minute, and have a really great time together. So thank you, and have a good night.